Welcome to the Oshow. I'm Laura Babcock, and joining us again for a conversation I have been waiting a couple of months to get to, and Kathleen Wynne, former Premier of Ontario. Kathleen Wynne, where do we begin? Where do you want to pick up on the conversation? Because the last time you were on, the Greenbelt Scandal was just starting to explode. And since then, there have been so many revelations and policy reversals. So, to you, former Madam Premier, where would you like to start?
Well, I think we talked about the other shoe dropping. There've been, boxes of shoes dropping, right? It's
I
just like,
likened it to a centipede. I said, Kathleen,
honestly,
another shoe's going to drop. I feel like there's been 100.
I know. It's really been quite something. And the thing is, Laura, I don't think it's over. I think that well, we know we've got the RCMP investigation. There seems to be movement on MZOs. There's revelation after revelation. So I think this government is in and has been in major damage control, trying to put other things on the table so that people will be distracted from what's going on.
Are you talking about beer? Beer in 2 years
Well,
corner stores?
the most recent one is the corner store beer and wine sales. I mean, that's a big deal. I know because we brought in the loosening of the regulations around beer and grocery stores. We started that process, and I was stunned. Actually, I had a hilarious conversation with one of my colleagues, one of my cabinet colleagues, because I don't drink beer, and I was saying, really, is this such a big deal? It is such a big deal, Laura.
I think it's a big deal. I mean, like, I grew up in Quebec, and yes, we had it, so we take it for granted. So I have no issue with like getting on with the rest of the world operates. But it's not a big deal right now for 2 years from now. This is timing to try to get us not to talk about all the stuff we're about to talk about, right?
Well, they're looking for a positive hit now because they want a distraction from the other things. And then if you look at the date when this is going to come in, it's January 26th. The provincial election is in 2026. So they want it in place in order for people to have felt the benefit of it by the spring of 26. So, I don't have a problem with it either. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether prices actually go down. I think, there are concerns about the vulnerability of people who run convenience stores and having alcohol in the stores. But as you say, this happens everywhere else in the Western world.
Figure that, and we'll figure those things out.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, what I got so frustrated by was at a time when there's a new AG report that comes out, Kathleen, that talks about the fact that, we've got nursing agencies privately poaching from our public system, selling these services back at 3 times the cost to the taxpayer. We've got a homeless crisis. We've got food bank usage record levels. We've got seniors now on homeless lists. Like, we are watching our province crumble in so many important ways. And then there's this, 9-week vacation from any scrutiny at Queen's Park. The Premier decides he can come back after Family Day. The rest of us are sitting here going, how do we make it through the holidays with ER closures and all this madness? And then they invest in a beer promotion. And to me, he put out a tweet earlier today saying, going to be convenient beer, wine, and spirits or whatever, or beer, wine, and cider at stores. And he lists these green check marks of benefits for that. And so I just did a mirror structure of actually what Ontario wants him to talk about, which is how do we get to that fun day in 2026 when we all have booze at the corners. Like, I'm a little worried about the 2 years in between, Kathleen. I don't know about you.
Well, exactly. I mean, you talk about food bank usage at this time of year. It is so acute, and people are struggling. Not to mention the fact that in terms of housing, people so worried about mortgage renewals next year. Not that Ford has any direct levers to pull on that, but people are anxious about a lot of things. Now, you could argue then that then gives them the excuse to sort of celebrate any kind of good news that comes their way. And I think Ford is capitalizing on that. But there's an underlying anxiety about what's going on in the world. And I think that we can't deny that. And you're right, the next 2 years, who knows what's going to happen? I wish, Laura, that I believed that the government actually had a plan. I wish that I believed that they had a plan to deal with the shortfalls in the healthcare system. I wish I believed that they had a plan to make sure that kids who are dealing with mental health issues either don't end up on the street, or they get the support that they need in our schools. I wish that all those things were happening, but I just don't believe it. I think one of the things about a populist government like this one is that they kind of go after the shiny baubles, and there isn't a plan laid out. A perfect example of that is the energy system, and the epiphany that they've had on electric vehicles and on clean renewable energy, when there was a long-term energy plan in place when we lost government in 2018. All they had to do was work on that plan, and we would have had 6 extra years of building clean electricity. So when I say I don't think they've got a plan, I'm not sure that they think through policies in a way that is rational. I think it's more about polling numbers, and that's not a good way to make public policy.
And I think donor interests. I mean, haven't we seen that in the Greenbelt mapped out?
For sure.
The same names keep popping up. We'll get to Ontario Place in a second, but just on this energy thing, I mean, it wasn't 750 contracts, Kathleen, that they kind of tore up.
The lowest number I've heard is that $231 million in contracts were canceled in 2019, just after they were elected. It's just a colossal waste.
A colossal waste. And you put out a tweet where you said, because of petty partisan politics. I went a little further and said it felt like spite, right? Like it was like they were doing it. We don't believe in that ideologically, or our donors, or our populist rhetoric, or whatever. So we're going to cancel all this stuff. Like, what a waste to the taxpayer, both in terms of our money to cancel those projects, but also in terms of the progress we haven't made. And I'm aware, as I say this, you came in on the gas plant scandal, right? That was a political decision that cost $1 billion boondoggle. So I'm not letting you off the hook. I haven't.
No, I get that.
Right?
I get that.
But the waste of time on this is maddening if you care about the environment.
Absolutely. And and if you care about the economy, because what's happening is you can see that industry has gone in the direction that we were going in. Electric vehicles are becoming what the auto industry is producing. And so Ford sees that, even though he might not have chosen it, he sees that. So he's now all of a sudden on side. But there's no point in having clean electric vehicles if you've got a dirty electricity grid, And what they've been doing, this government, since they came into office, is basically building more gas plants. And that just means that the air is not going to be cleaner. So I think that it's a real shame that they didn't think that through when they came into office. And, spite, I mean, you're using a stronger word than I am, but it's absolutely true. The government came in and said, if they're doing it, we're going to cancel it. Well, that's nonsense, because there are lots of issues that are not partisan and should be supported, right?
So one of the things that makes me kind of crazy about this is that, and I was on a podcast earlier today talking about this, it's one thing if everything is going swimmingly. The government has a plan, the economy's booming, we're not recovering from a pandemic, which we're still, not recovered from in so many ways. Mm-hmm. To see the juxtaposition of the priorities of this government, whether it is taking lands out of the Greenbelt, when we're obviously seeing that we are in a climate crisis, benefiting donors, privatizing our public healthcare system when we desperately need it, seeing rolling ER closures throughout the province. I mean, you see all of this going on. And for me, the homeless crisis is like nothing I've ever seen before. And you cannot go anywhere, at least not in Hamilton, not even in the rich areas of town where you never used to see homeless people living in homelessness, people on the streets. And now it's like, this is everywhere I go. How is this government spending its time, not just on schemes like the Greenbelt, but on things like a $500 million parking garage at Ontario Place? I mean, maybe in some utopic world where the money is flowing and the sky is raining gold and everybody has shelter and food, fine, have the stupid spa if it brings in some tourist dollars. But I don't understand how this government Kathleen, is governing this way when it feels so counterintuitive to the experience and the anxiety of so many in Ontario. I mean, have you ever seen anything like it? I don't know if it's tone deaf or deliberate or lack of planning. I don't know.
Well, I think it's lack of planning from the top. I think that when you have a premier who really didn't come in with a platform or a plan, and in neither election that Doug Ford has run in, 2018 or 2022, did he have a clearly laid out strategy and plan. And we called for the release of the mandate letters, and they refused to release the mandate letters that were given to the ministers. And I think that's very telling, Laura. It's not that mandate letters have been released to the public for years. We were the first government to do it, but fair enough. I just think that if people knew what it was asked of the ministers, that would give us a better idea of what the trajectory was. But, in those first 2 years of the Ford government, it was quite clear that they were just intent on doing what you already identified, which was undoing the stuff we had done. And then COVID came along, and COVID forced Doug Ford to actually read the teleprompter, because he was given a teleprompter and he was forced to read the teleprompter and talk about what the experts were saying. He got that, and I give him credit for that, because he wasn't listening to experts before. He didn't have a plan. And the problem is that COVID was not a plan. COVID was something that the government had to react to. And
response strategy,
right,
actual plan.
Yeah. Right. And so now we're kind of back to the way this government governs, which is, I would say, pretty shambolic. They move from thing to thing without much of an ability for us to predict where they're going to go. And then when they do make an announcement, and I'm going to use the Peel, the breaking up of Peel as an example of that. As soon as Doug Ford made that announcement, I thought, whoa, this is an off-the-cuff thing that he's promised to Hazel McCallion. I wondered, is it because he didn't want Bonnie Crombie to run for the leadership, the Liberal leadership, and he thought if he did this, then maybe she'd stay out of it so she could go through the transition? Who knows? But I know, because we looked at that whole scenario. We looked at the representation of Brampton and the whole makeup of Peel. It's extremely complicated. And to just snap your fingers and say, we're going to do this, it was nonsense. It was nonsense from the moment he stepped up to the podium to say that. So people didn't know that. People didn't know that it was going to be really difficult to do. They thought, why would people know that? But he should have known it. He's the premier. He can be briefed, But clearly he wanted the political announcement. But then what happens is he has to backtrack, and it just makes people think, like, do you know what you're doing? Do you really have any clue what you're doing? And the next time you make an announcement, can we believe that it's actually going to happen? So that's what makes me worry about the way this government functions.
I think Cynthia Mulligan said to them in the presser, the other day, do you guys think before you act? I forget her exact words, but it was so many reversals, right? Reversals on the Greenbelt, reversals on Peel, reversals on MCA. So it's this sense of, you called it shambolic, and maybe some of it is spite driven, maybe some of it is chaos, but we are the largest province in Ontario. You know more than anyone else I could get in that chair what the job is, how significant it is in terms of our economy and all kinds of other things. Yeah. And to see, how does it feel for you? I mean, for me, it's is the guy just trying to profiteer and privatize? And is this all some big scheme? Or are they just bumping from one thing to another like a pinball? I don't know. But what does it feel like for you to see the province being governed, if we can use that word, in this way?
Well, it's very frustrating. And, as you say, we're the largest province in the country. And what Ontario does is, it's material to what happens in the rest of the country. It really is. So if Ontario decides to cancel green energy, that's a problem for the rest of the country in terms of emissions reductions. If Ontario gets on board, that's a good thing for the rest of the country. So I think that what we do here has an impact on what happens everywhere else in the country. And so I really despair when I see a government like this one that doesn't seem to have a rudder, Laura. It just seems to be a boat that's floating around and is going to react to the waves that come at it, but isn't going to chart a path. And that really worries me. And, I think that, again, we have to ask the Premier of the province, what is it that you believe in? What's the vision of the province that you have? Where do you want to be in 10 years? Look at what's happening in the post-secondary sector right now. You've got college and university presidents saying we are in desperate straits. The 10% tuition reduction. First of all, when Ford came in, they canceled the free tuition program. That meant that there were thousands of kids living in poverty or single moms, people who couldn't access post-secondary, who all of a sudden couldn't access it again. They canceled the basic income pilot, which also helped people to get back to school. But, if you don't believe in post-secondary education, then tell us that, tell us that you don't, tell us that you're going to try to diminish the system, and then people can make a decision on whether they support that or not. But because we have not had that kind of honest statement, the population that's affected is kind of taken aback when these things happen, right? And that really worries me because it has an impact on our future economic well-being. And Doug Ford talks about, being for the people and being for small businesses and so on. But honestly, if we don't have the building blocks in place, and you've talked about healthcare, you've talked about access to healthcare, you've talked about poverty, I'm talking about post-secondary, those are really important building blocks for a strong economy. And yet we have a government that really doesn't seem to want to pay attention to those things, and that we don't really know what they believe about those things. And that's a challenge, I think, for the people of Ontario.
Well, so I keep vacillating between these two thoughts, and help me out if you can, Kathleen, and everybody else who's watching this. On the one hand, I think, he doesn't seem like a values-based leader. He doesn't state upfront what his true values are. And so everything feels like we're all over the place, and it's kind of scary and disruptive and chaotic and expensive, and causing a lot of stress for people in this province. So part of me thinks that, so it's just chaos, just chaos or mercurial or just whatever. But then there's another part of me that thinks, well, that's kind of good in a sense, because if some of the values are to, starve public health care and other public institutions and support the Science Center and all these things so that you can take it apart and sell it for pieces in the private market to enrich people at the expense of others, I'm kind of glad that when the tide turns on this premier, he reverses himself. Like, I'm glad he reversed himself on the Greenbelt. I'm glad they're reversing themselves on some MZOs, right?
Sure.
Like,
sure.
So I'm kind of between,
Yeah.
Government's values aren't very good. And we weren't told what they were. We were just told, a buck of beer and like license plate stickers aren't going to cost money. And we went, yay. If there's really some motives here that are going to harm people in this province, I'm kind of glad that this government's chaotic and we can push back and don't have to wait till 2026.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. It's just kind of a perverse way of having to get to the right answer, or at least partially the partial right answer. Yeah, if you're going to have a government that's going to make terrible decisions about the Green Belt and Ontario Place or whatever, and they reverse themselves, yeah, that's a good thing. But wouldn't it be better if we had a government that didn't make terrible decisions in the first place? Sorry, I just have a hard time giving too much credit for making terrible decisions and creating a mess and then cleaning it up partially. So you're right.
Expense of all of us.
Yeah.
Like, we're not getting like this. We're doing this for free because we have to, because this government seems like we're on an out of control roller coaster in this province, and we're just trying to all steer it. It's
and we're at the whim of a personality in the premier who wants people to like him, who wants he wants the kudos and the sort of approbation of being in the premier's office, and is trying to capitalize, I think, on this. Oh, well, it's good to admit when you make a mistake. Well, yeah, but that does wear thin. I mean, if every major policy decision that you make, you have to backtrack and say, oh, we didn't mean it, and Paul Calandra, and then bizarrely apologizing to the developers, like, oh, sorry, we didn't, we meant to do the right thing, we meant to help you out, but we screwed up, like, what's that about? So there's an element of wanting to have it both ways, and yes, cleaning up messes that are created. But to my point about the energy and the colossal waste of time, that's a waste of time too, Laura, because what happened in that Greenbelt fiasco was that municipalities got a whole different set of instructions than they would have otherwise. They already had their targets in place, their building targets, and now they've got to kind of go back to the drawing board with that land being put back in. That causes a lot of stress in municipalities and in communities, and in communities where there isn't a lot of staff to do that work, right? So that's a waste of time, and time is money when you're talking about people having to undo work that they've already done. So it doesn't look like it's damaging, because the premier can stand up and say, oh, well, we've reversed our decision, we're bringing in a new piece of legislation. But that has a ripple effect, because the taking the lands out of the Greenbelt had a ripple effect, right? Whatever gets reversed around Ontario Place will have a ripple effect, right? So it is wasteful.
Yeah, and so it's costly to the taxpayer, right? We're paying for the lawsuits, we're paying for the reversals, we're paying for the staff time, we're paying for all of it,
right?
And it's costly psychologically. I mean, we're coming out of a pandemic, which I don't think we've all had a real honest discussion about the mental health cost and cost to our families and our dynamics and our marriages and everything else. We are still trying to dig our way out of this and rebuild our society. And we are finding ourselves having to put so much energy into fighting against, to your words, terrible decisions. What spa cuts down mature trees? Like, it doesn't even make sense, right? Like we're so it feels like every day. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic here, Kathleen. I mean, you brought it up, the shoes to drop. I feel like every day, even if I don't want to be on Ford Watch, I can't get to noon without my phone blowing up with, can you believe this? Can you believe this? I mean, like, what do you think is still coming? What is the shoe going to be?
I don't have that crystal ball. I really, who knows? But I do know that, they, as I say, they've been in damage mode now for some time. Who knows what they are hearing about investigations? They won't have heard much, I don't think. We don't know what the financial accountability officer is going to look at in terms of what everything that has happened is going to cost. But I think that there will be more revelations about, as you say, those lawsuits, that money that's gone out, the cost to municipalities. I think we are going to hear more about those things. And I don't think we're finished with Ontario Place. We're not finished with the energy system. Like, I think there's lots of information that has still to come out. I think people are most concerned. You and I read the news pathologically, if I can say, Laura. We do. We do. Most people are concerned about whether their families are going to be able to have a holiday, whether they're going to be able to get their kids Hanukkah gifts or Christmas gifts, or whether they're going to be able to spend time with family. There already are some warnings out about large gatherings over the holidays, because, as you say, we're really not done with COVID, and the vaccination rates are not what they should be, right? So those are the things that I think people are most concerned with. Meanwhile, the government is kind of spinning over here, and there will be a bit of a period of calm now until Family Day in terms of the legislature and news. But who knows what kinds of announcements are going to be made or what kinds of discoveries are going to be made. We just don't know. And that's to my point, that if we had a better idea of what the government was working on and what its plan was, like, I don't know, are they going to make an announcement to deal with the challenges that post-secondary institutions, like, I teach a course at U of T, and students tell me what they're struggling with. You talked about mental health. Are we going to see actual supports put in place for kids dealing with mental health? Because we are not past the impacts of COVID. The whole issue around kids and screen time and going into work or not going to work and social interactions, we're not past that, and we have to focus on it.
I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and I decided, the last couple of weeks, got my boosters, gonna go out, gonna catch up with colleagues who have kids the same age. We are all struggling as pandemic parents, right? It's a label we need to own, because we didn't just get kids through social media and all the hell of that. And climate change. And now we got two hot wars raging in the world that they're hearing about all day long outside of school and their homes. But we also have what they went through socially during the pandemic, the isolation, the fear, that watching the family dynamics under this incredible stress and pressure. And if you try to get psychological help for kids, it is, if you can't pay for it privately or don't have a good plan, even then you got to wait. But it's 6 months minimum, even in like crisis. It's absolutely dangerous and untenable to run a province this way. I feel like, how sometimes in business, I don't know if you had the same experience in education, but sometimes you do stress tests, right? You do these abnormal pressure tests to see how much a product or how much a situation can bear, or a crisis team or whatever. I feel like the pandemic put the world through a stress test. We are still coming out of it, but I feel like this chaotic, shambolic governance, if we even want to call it a governance model, going on with the Ford government, is a stress test every day on Ontarians who are engaged, and to the people who aren't pathologically, in this business. They are feeling the results of that. I always say to people, you might not care about politics, but it cares about you. The next time you try to go to an ER and it's closed and you're wondering why, or you're getting terrible treatment at the hospital because there's a shortage of nurses, or you're wondering why your residential tax bills are through the roof, or you're wondering why people are at the street in your corner store where they never were before in a tent. That's because of the decisions. Not all of it rests on Ford and crew, but a lot of those things do. Healthcare, education, right? Municipal oversight, the Greenbelt. So we can't afford not to be engaged. I'll terribly plagiarize Plato, but I think the comment was, that the price of not being engaged in politics is to be ruled by evil men. And I'm not calling for evil, but I'm saying, like, it affects you whether or not you are pathologically watching every move that's happening with this Ford government. We don't know their vision. We have fears about what it is based on some of their actions. We have no stability. And this stress test, I think, is having a really deleterious impact. So let me ask you, as someone who ran a government, not perfectly, I didn't agree with everything that you guys were up to, but I always felt like you had a plan. Like, I felt like I knew who Kathleen Wynne was. I knew what your progressive policies were. I knew where you were on energy and on education. I feel like right now it's waking up every morning to a stress test about the latest revelation about something this government's been up to. And we haven't even got the RCMP investigation back. So, I mean, like, how would you run? Like, how does Ford, I know you can't answer this other than in the abstract, but how does Ford, like, I know he's not going into work, but how does he get up in the morning and say, I run Ontario and I don't know what the hell is happening? Like, I don't understand that kind of leadership.
Yeah, I don't, I can't, as you say, I can't answer that question. He and I are very different people. I think we have to ask, who are the people around him? What are the people around him thinking, and where do they think the province should go? Because I think that's actually more relevant, because he's listening to them, and because we don't know what he stands for. I think that the people around him have I would say, I'm going to say undue, but certainly a very large influence on the direction that we go. And they're not in the public eye, so it's very hard to hold them to account, right? And that makes me nervous as well. And so maybe some of the policies that come out of that office are more about that than they are about what Doug Ford actually thinks about the way the province should be run. But in terms of, when Doug Ford gets up in the morning, I mean, I think he's looking for what's the next great thing I can do, that will put a smile on people's face, as opposed to what's the thing that we need to do that's actually going to continue to build a solid foundation for the province. I mean, it's quite obvious that now that Bonnie Crombie is the leader of the Liberals, one of the big foci for them in the morning is, what's the next ad we can run against Bonnie Crombie, because she's a threat to us, So there's the notion of the next election and the seat count is very, very important to Doug Ford. I always remember in 2018 when we had just lost the election, and I was sitting in the legislature because I stayed for those years, right? I remember him coming across the floor, and Mitzi Hunter was sitting behind me. She was a member in Scarborough-Guildwood at that point. And, this was just after the election. And he shook my hand, and then he looked up at Mitzi and he said, "We're going to get you next time. We're going to get that seat next time." And I thought, wow, you just won a huge majority. You crushed us. Good on you, whatever. And you're worried about one seat in Scarborough? Like, it was such a telling moment for me that this is what it's about. It's about having the power and having this huge majority, and that being the thing. And I know that government is about politics and policy. But if those two aren't balanced, if it's more about politics than policy, that's a huge problem. And I honestly believe we have a government in office right now that is more about politics than policy. We certainly have a premier who thinks more about politics than about good governance and policy. And so it leaves the rest of us kind of scrambling, thinking about, well, where are they going to go next? And so it's very important that voices like yours and voices like all the people who spoke up when the land was taken out of the Greenbelt, that those voices continue, because that is, that's got to be part of the touchstone for what the Parliament at Queen's Park actually thinks about.
Wow, you give me a lot to think about. I think that bifurcating it a little bit between politics and policy, you're right. The policy seems to be shambolic. The politics seems to be at times mercurial and spiteful. Like it makes a lot of sense, right? If the lens that he looks through is how can we be popular and win seats and put smiles on people's faces, it explains, the whole beer nonsense that we've been hearing the last couple of days, as opposed to all the things in policy perspectives you'd hope to hear announcements on, whether it be the education, or whether it be, homelessness, or whether it be rent control issues or affordable housing or anything. Like, respond to Trudeau's new wartime housing thing and talk about its operationalization in Ontario. Don't tell me about beer in 2 years in a corner store. I couldn't care less. So it almost it's almost like cognitive dissonance sometimes being in this province. And I think that's helpful to understand that possibly he just doesn't see the policy lane as being as important, or that he doesn't get why maybe we think it is. I don't know. But I think that's very good insight. So let me just close with a couple of questions I asked you last time that our audience found very helpful. And let me go with this one first, because you just alluded to it. So it's important that voices stay engaged, that people stay watching, that we are all sort of on forward watch because it's shambolic. What else should we be doing, Kathleen? Like, from your vantage point, having sat in that chair of power, understanding the influence that the public can or cannot have on that office, and you alluded to who's really running the Premier's office, and we saw through the Greenbelt, right? There were some like envelopes and letters and emails saying, give me this, give me that. Okay. So I'm concerned about that too. But what do you think that the people of Ontario should be doing with our time to get this government making this a more just and functioning society?
Well, people, as I said before, don't have tons of time in their lives, but I think that if there are things that people care about, whether it's their kids' school, or whether it is the environment, or whatever the issue is that really grabs you. I think if you talk to other people about your concerns and you don't shy away from difficult conversations, one of the things that I worry about is that people are disengaging because there is this uncertainty. People disengage and they just kind of throw up their hands and say, I'm going to go have a meal with my family, or I'm going to go have a coffee with a friend, and I'm not going to think about all the bad things that are happening. I guess I would say, can we all just try to think about the things that are happening? Maybe there's stuff that people, obviously, there are a lot of people who agree with the things that Doug Ford is doing. Fine. Talk about them, but listen to the people who are worried. I think that it's important in our communities to do that. Social media divides us. Social media doesn't bring us together. And so we need to find ways, and we're going into a period of time right now where we're going to see people who we don't necessarily see the rest of the year. And maybe we can have some conversations about what's going on. And then that can motivate some of us to get involved. There are lots of organizations that care about all of the issues that you've talked about today. And I really think that it's important that we stay engaged. That to me is the most important thing. And that's what I say to my students, who ask me, well, how do I get involved in politics? You don't have to join a political party. Just having conversations about things that you care about it can change people's minds, and it can motivate people to take action. So for me, I think that's the easiest thing for people to do, is just not shy away from those conversations.
I think that's brilliant because 25 years of doing call-in shows on politics, oftentimes people would say, I wanted to call your show, but I don't feel like I know enough, and I don't know how to engage, and I don't know all the players, and I don't know all the terminology. So they kind of back away. Or it's too overwhelming. There's too many problems. I can't deal with it. I don't see the answer to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem apparent. And I worry about that despairing, right? I try
Yeah.
to take a balance in any show that I do of it's about hope. Nothing is inevitable. Bad things don't have to keep happening. We saw it on the Greenbelt. We can push back. We can be
Yeah.
heard. We don't have to wait for another election with a low voter turnout, right? We can do things now. And I think you're very smart to focus on, rather than trying to eat the whole elephant, do it one bite at a time. What do you care about? I'm using an analogy, of course, but or how do you climb a mountain one step at a time? Take something you care about. Don't try to fix the entire structure or all the people in it. Pick something and see who's doing what about it and what needs to be done differently, and have a voice. So I love that. It's a good message of hope going into the holidays. So let me just end on the question I think I might have ended on with you last time. Is, if you were in Doug Ford's chair, and you have been, I don't know if they changed the office furniture, but you're as close as it gets. What would you be worried about right now? I mean, other than pleasing people and winning that seat that they missed last time, what would you really be worried about if you were in his chair right now?
I'd really, really be worried about people who are living on the margins in terms of their ability to pay for the things they need in their lives. I'd be wanting to sit down with the federal government and have that conversation. I hope that is the conversation that the finance ministers, I think they're meeting today with Chrystia Freeland. What can we do to tackle the issues of poverty? Housing, the housing issue is huge. I don't know if we've got enough short-term solutions to that. I worry about that. We are going to have winter. I know it's a warm day right today, but it is going to get cold, and we need more immediate solutions, but we need a midterm strategy around how are we going to help people through whatever this next few months is going to bring in terms of affordability. That's what I would be really focused on right now. And I don't see it, Laura. I don't see this government, for example. I mean, just to join two things, I would be going back to my staff and I would be saying, okay, look, in September 24, we need to think about the students who are not going to be able to afford to go to college or university or into a training program. And so what can we do as a provincial government to make sure that those kids are able to do that? It's an affordability issue, it's an education issue, and it's an economic issue. So I'd be looking at, because I'm me, I'd be looking at how do we put affordability for students back on the agenda, and how do we make sure colleges and universities are able to accommodate them? So those are a couple of things that I would be really worried about right now.
So from a policy conscientious point of view, if you were back in that chair, what would be the most pressing issues? And I take that. If you were actually Doug Ford at this moment, looking ahead to say, I don't know if it's an IC investigation or another AG or the RCMP or the electorate or Bonnie Crombie, I mean, or Merritt or Mike, what would it be that, would you'd have high alarm on, and your team would probably be constantly in crisis management mode or anticipating? I mean, where do you think that headspace is?
You mean in terms of what might be coming down the track at them? Yeah, well, for sure, they are trying to figure out what the RCMP is going to be doing. If I were them, I'd want to be getting out ahead of that. I'd want to figure out what is it that we have to disclose that is going to inoculate us. Although I think it's a bit late for that, Laura. I think that should have happened weeks, probably months ago, because I just don't believe that we know everything that Doug Ford knew and when he knew it, and so they're trying to issue manage that for sure, and they won't know exactly. I doubt they'll know exactly when the RCMP is going to report out, but you better believe they got a lot of people in a war room dealing with how they're going to manage that. So
I await that impatiently, but I do hold off judgment on whether anything illegal, of course, went down until we hear what the RCMP has to say.
of
But we
course.
do absolutely know that there has been a lot of terrible governance, terrible decisions, wasted time and energy, literally and figuratively. From what we've seen from this government, especially in this term, and it's stressful and it can be frustrating and it can make people want to give up. But Kathleen, I love having you on the program, not just for your you've got sight lines on this that no one else has. But it's the fact that, you're always encouraging the next step, the hopeful thing, what we can do in the middle of this shambolic era, shall we say, of the Ford government.
Well, yeah, and you know what, Laura? I've got 6 grandkids, and the youngest 2 are going to be 7 months, twin boys, and I just have to believe that we've got a bright future in this province. It is such a beautiful and talented place, and so I'm not giving up hope ever. And I really, because I've been to every corner. Yes, I've sat in the office at Queen's Park, but the great thing about being premier is that I've been to every corner of the province, and there are fantastic people everywhere living their lives, doing the things that they know are good for their families and their communities. I was at a Christmas concert, a holiday concert last night at my granddaughter's high school in Orangeville, and it was fantastic. The grade 9 kids were playing. Most of them hadn't picked up their instruments before they started grade 9, and this wonderful teacher had taught them. And you cannot lose hope when you see that kind of thing happening. So just a shout out to every teacher and education assistant and staffer all over the province working with kids. That's what gives me hope. It's what always has. And so we just gotta, we've got to get through this period and come out on the other side.
Well, I love that, and I'll leave it on that uplifting message. It's the holiday season, and I just want to thank you so much, Kathleen Wynne, both for your time in leadership, but your continued engagement for the good of the Ontario that you clearly love, and for your grandchildren, and for the future. And for all of you who watch this program and subscribe on YouTube, thank you. We will keep the conversation going. I think it is important that we all talk about it, even when it's difficult, and hear from people like Kathleen who have hope and know how it works more than we do. So that sets me on a better mood for the holidays, and I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to a 2024 where maybe we can get more policy and more solutions in this province. But if we don't, we can continue to push back and get the kind of governance that we need for all the people that we care so much about on the streets this holiday season and throughout the year. Let's never forget them and realize that those of us who have a voice have to fight for the people who really don't. and they depend on us. So thank you so much, Kathleen Wynne. Wonderful
Pleasure.
holiday
Thanks,
to
Laura.
you and your grandkids and everyone in your world. And thank you all. This won't be our last show of the season. We got a couple more big ones coming up of the year, but certainly take your time over the holidays to share this episode with your friends because she understands stuff that we don't. And it's so helpful for me every time. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thanks, Laura. Take care.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow.